So it doesn't matter if you do this in a program or by hand, it works either way. So first I'm just going to add in some perspective lines here. And now I'm going to move it out. This is technically a mistake since I'm doing it in 1-point perspective. Obviously for 1-point perspective there's a much bigger area that you have to avoid for warping, but for the sake of this I wanted to move it out so that I could, you know, just show it on a bigger area. So the first thing you want to do is determine what size the object is going to be at a certain point in perspective. So in this case we're doing a brick wall, and so right now I'm just drawing in the vertical lines. If I wanted to take the time I would make them all the same size, but since this is just an example, I'm not really paying too much attention there, especially since we're more concerned with the horizontal aspect where we're receding into space. So I'm going to pretend that I'm inking this by hand later, and you're going to see me lower the opacity down with each step. That's just to keep things clear for me. I also use multiple colors. Really, you can do it any way you want to as long as it remains clear for you. So in the case of this, let's pretend that we have a character in space here. So we want the bricks to be a certain size in relation to the other objects or people around them. So say I have a character here. So I'm going to mark how large I want this brick to be. In the area next to the character, you can start from one end or the other. It doesn't really matter, as long as the principal area where you want it to be is correct. So what you're going to do first is you're going to find the midpoint of the object. This is why boxes works best. So you're going to draw an X from corner to corner, and then that defines your midpoint, and you're going to pull that back to the vanishing point. And in this case, since I'm starting in the middle, I'm going to also pull it out towards the outer edges so I can extend the shape there. So this type of thing is going to work for telephone poles, fences, really whatever you want that you need spaced evenly. The next step is to take the opposite corner of whatever direction you're moving in. So if you're moving closer to yourself, you're going to use the farthest corner from yourself. If you're moving away from yourself, you're using the closest corner to yourself. So you're going to grab the opposite corner and pull it through where the midpoint intersects the other line. And just bring it down to your receding line and draw a line up, and you have another brick in perspective. It's not as easy to see here, but it will become much easier to see the perspective when we zoom out and have the entire line done. It's better to do these with really thin lines, which is why this is good if like you're planning to ink it by hand later, because then you have more control over your line width and adding more character to it. But in this case, having thinner lines makes it easier for you to keep your midpoints and the points in which lines cross each other consistent, so that you have a consistent result instead of, having bricks that are larger in the back as opposed to closer and you don't know why. So yeah, thinner lines are always best. So now we're actually going to go back the other way, going through the midpoint and drawing a line up. See right here, you can already tell because we're going outside of the cone of vision, so things are going to start skewing a little bit. But this is where you can see best how that is. And also, if you're having trouble navigating between 2 points, you can always draw beyond your receding line or your vanishing line, depending on your terminology, and just concentrate on making sure that it goes through the midpoint line, because that's the most important point. So there you can see the shapes receding into perspective. And since we're doing bricks, we're going to use diagonal lines to find the midpoint of each brick to make sure that when we put in the other lines that we are in perspective and that they're all correct, instead of just eyeballing it. You can eyeball it, especially if you don't want to do the extra step of, drawing all the vertical lines or making a grid, but this is what I prefer doing. To each their own. So now what I'm doing is I'm changing colors, changing the opacity of the layer beneath it, and now I'm drawing vertical lines for all of the bricks, which will end up being a grid, basically, receding into space. Now that you have all of your lines, you can basically get rid of, all the work you did figuring out all those, because I just find that they're very distracting. And then I will go through and, just erase things. Now this is basically perfect for, sketching over, inking over, and you don't have to worry about your perspective anymore. And this can be applied to really anything. For example, let's do this for a person. Whoops, need to turn off the perspective lines. All right. So first we're going to do just a general sketch of how big we want these people to be in space. This is a good way to also establish your perspective lines. So if you have two people in perspective along a vanishing line together, then you can do a receding line through the two of them to establish what your vanishing points are. But in this case, I'm just kind of eyeballing it for my own sake, because that's what I like doing. I like to use the middle of the head for this, and usually you would want to use whoever the principal character is, or just, whatever works best for you to keep things straight. I think I forgot my vanishing line, but whatever. So we're actually going to expand our canvas here just as an example. So this is really skewed, but you know, this is just an example. So pull it back and do your vertical line up, and then use your vanishing line, and that's as tall as you want someone right there in space. And then of course again it works the same way. So like if these were like guards standing even spaces away from each other, literally anyone you need that's standing a certain amount away from each other. Or you can use this as a way to keep track of how tall people should be receding into space. So even if they're not directly on a vanishing line from each other, you still have a pretty good idea of how tall they ought to be in space, so that you can portray that perspective correctly. So yeah, this is a really quick, simple trick that I learned in college. I haven't seen a whole lot of people talk about it, so and I've seen some people I know talk about how much they hate doing things like bricks and stuff in perspective. So I just wanted to, well, I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and thought this was a good time to do it. So I hope it's helpful, and I hope you get some good use out of it. And if you want to see more of my work, you can find me at links below. And yeah. Thank you very much for watching.